Mamma mia!
I'm vibing with it. Alright, I think I'm ready to go. Hey, how's it going? Welcome to this new video. I know this is a bit of an unusual setup that you guys are probably not used to. So what happened was I did set up my camera. I don't know if you can see the tripod back there, but I was gonna start recording and shoot a video, but none of the batteries of my camera were charged. So now they're charging right now, and I'm getting impatient, and I'm thinking, well, I have this webcam I can use. You know, I just hooked it up to my computer, I have my microphone, so I guess I can make a video like this, you know, whatever, fuck it. So last night I watched a movie called The Amusement Park. So The Amusement Park is a film directed by the late 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero. It was originally shot in 1973, and it was shot with 16mm film over the course of just 3 days, and it was all shot in this one location at this amusement park. I forget what it's called, Westview Park in Westview, Pennsylvania, according to Wikipedia, the most reliable source on the internet. And it was shot with only a budget of $37,000, which is pretty low. This movie is actually very interesting, and I even hesitate to call it a movie because this was more of like a PSA that 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero did for this film was actually commissioned by, and I quote, the Lutheran Service Society of Western Pennsylvania. And I actually just clicked on this because I did not know this before shooting this video, but Lutheranism is one of the largest branches of Protestantism that identifies with the teachings of Jesus Christ and was founded by Martin Luther, a 16th century German reformer whose efforts to reform the theology and practices of the church launched the Protestant Reformation. So there you go. Those are the people that asked 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero to shoot this educational PSA video for them. Apparently this was George's only work for hire project that he ever did, and what I mean by that is this was the first and only project he ever did where he basically made this for somebody else as opposed to it just being like this artistic project that he was doing, like his idea. So that's kind of interesting that, this was made for somebody else. And the subject of this PSA educational video that 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero did for these people is on the subject of elderly abuse, which is very interesting and very coincidental when you come to find out that this, movie would be released 50 years later after it was filmed. For everybody to see for the very first time, and it happens to be about elderly abuse, and like it follows this elderly man. Well, actually I'll get into that in a bit. I think I should actually first start off by talking about 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero and who he is, in case some of you don't even know who he is. 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero, if you don't know who he is most notably known for basically popularizing the entire zombie genre as we know it. He's responsible for films such as Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, pretty much any big zombie movie that you can think of that has of the dead after the name of the title is pretty much done by him, or at the very least heavily inspired by his work. But 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero basically got his big breakout with the 1968 film Night of the Living Dead, which I'm sure all of you have at least heard of. It's like the quintessential zombie movie, the one that started it all basically. And although that 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero didn't necessarily create the concept of zombies, since there were films and stories and ideas that existed before this that touched on the concept of zombies, George played a huge factor in the the whole lore of zombies as we know it. And he's also done a bunch of other prolific horror films such as Martin, The Crazies, which is another big one. He did Night Riders, Monkey Shines, Two Evil Eyes, The Dark Half, Bruiser, which I saw a long time ago and I remember it being fucking horrible. And he also created the Creepshow movies with Stephen King. So there you go. 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶 Romero definitely has his name in the horror genre. Without George, the horror genre would not be what it is today. So he's a big deal. Basically what happened was in 1973, what were the films that he did in between this? Okay, so it was between Season of the Witch, which was released in 1972, and The Crazies, which was released in 1973. So basically, George made this movie the same year as he did The Crazies, which is crazy to think about. Let's move on. And yeah, The Amusement Park is unlike anything he's really done, since it's less of a movie and more of an educational PSA video that he did for this service society of, Western Pennsylvania. which I don't know why he did it, but you know, there you go. And what's interesting about this film is that it was actually shelved for a long time. People speculate that it was because it was too gruesome for the public eye and they just didn't... What the fuck? Am I still recording? That was weird. My computer just shut off and I don't fucking know. But a lot of people speculate that the reason why this video, I should say, was shelved for so long was because people thought it was too gruesome, they thought it was a little too edgy, and they just didn't want to release it for the public eye for whatever reason. But you know, this was the 70s, so you know, what was considered gruesome and disturbing to them is probably by no means anywhere near the standards of what we consider gruesome or disturbing now. So that is definitely something to keep in mind when you hear that about this movie, because there's nothing like super blatantly fucked up or gruesome about this movie. Sorry, I'm sitting on pillows to make me look taller because I'm a very short guy, so like I feel like when I... Oh shit, look at that. That looks so much better. So yeah, George filmed about 50 minutes of footage, what it looks like, of this PSA video of basically this elderly man who decides to go to this amusement park by himself. And it kind of just starts off with him, you know, trying to have a very fun, normal day at this amusement park, but all of a sudden it turns into this hellish nightmare of these horrible people just treating him and these other elderly people at this amusement park like complete and total shit. And as mentioned, this is a film touching on the subject of elderly abuse, so that is definitely a theme that is very much prevalent throughout this whole thing. And yes, there is a lot of elderly abuse in this movie for sure. This film was actually considered to be lost forever, gone forever. No prints existed. It was completely lost to never ever be seen again, until apparently this was a 16mm print that was screened at the Torino Film Festival in 73 or around that time, and somebody found it in 2017. And so the George A. Romero Foundation basically oversaw the cut and they restored it into 4K, and the wonderful people over at Shudder decided to release the film in all of its glory in 4K, in complete full. A film that was considered to be lost is now found and available to watch on Shudder, so there you go. And I just find it so interesting that we have a new art project, I guess is what you can call it, by one of the biggest horror directors of all time. You know, we have a new movie by him basically, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, as mentioned, this is a very short movie. I hesitate to even call this a movie. It's only about 53 minutes, I think it is. So it barely qualifies as a movie. It's honestly more of like an episode of a TV show, or like a pilot of a TV show that never aired. Yeah, this is an interesting movie. What do I say about it? As mentioned, it follows this elderly man as he goes to this amusement park to just try to have a normal fun day, and then all of a sudden, you know, he's bombarded by these people who are treating him and these other elderly people like complete and utter shit for no reason. They're just abusing the elderly, and that's and the way that it's filmed and edited and put together kind of gives off a very nightmarish feeling. Almost offers like a look into the perspective of what an elderly person would be experiencing if they were to ever go through something like this, which is horrifying. Because the movie's very weird. It is very out there. It's, as I mentioned, it's more so like an art project than it is like a linear narrative film. Like, there's not really a story or a plot here. It's just more so conveying an idea or a theme, which is that of elderly abuse, and it captures that very well. So what it sets out to do, it does very well for sure. But what's really crazy about this movie for me personally is just the fact that there is a lost film directed by George A. Romero that was filmed in 1973 that nobody has seen up until now. I think the fact that it was filmed almost 50 years ago, you know, it's literally a movie made in the 70s. And the idea that it is about an elderly person or elderly people and they're being abused by, you know, just the general public. Just the fact that it has that same grimy 70s film aesthetic to it, you know, it complements the theme of the movie very well, and it's just so weird that out of any of the lost films to ever be directed by George A. Romero, this just happens to be, you know, what he came up with. So it's like, what a fucking coincidence, you know? What are the odds of this being the lost film that nobody were to ever see, and it's about elderly people, and it's a film shot in the 70s, and it has such a, like, an elderly vibe to it. And it's such an appropriate setting for a film that's trying to depict, you know, these hellish scenarios of elderly abuse, since the main character of the film is trying to find his youthfulness before it goes away forever. And what better way to do that than to go to an amusement park, which is a place that is loved and adored by children. If you were to go to anywhere to try to recapture your youthfulness, then the amusement park is the perfect place to do it. He could have gone at a Chuck E. Cheese, but he didn't do that. He went to a fucking amusement park. Could you imagine if this was at a Chuck E. Cheese instead of an amusement park? That would be even more horrifying. But we kind of got that with Wally's Wonderland World, whatever the fuck that movie's called. The movie's very subtle, and what I mean by that is there isn't, again, a straightforward story or plot to this. There aren't a whole lot of characters in here that are fleshed out or have, you know, a whole bunch of emotional depth to them, you know, and there's not like a fleshed out story with emotional depth to it either. It's just more so a video or an art project trying to depict this one theme centering on elderly abuse. And it does that perfectly, and my computer did the same thing. Do I need to click it like every 5 minutes for it to stop doing that? Okay, cool, I'm still recording. Like, for example, it's literally just about this elderly man who goes to an amusement park by himself, which is something that no elderly person would really do. But for the sake of the film and for the theme that it's trying to convey, it's perfect. And the fact that he's alone could also be an implication of, you know, how loved ones and people that, you know, in general just end up leaving you and distancing themselves from you as you grow older because they think, oh, you know, this person's becoming older, you know, they're starting to lose it a bit. So they distance themselves from you, and, you know, it's something that happens way too often, and, you know, we don't really take into account what we do when we do this to our elderly peers. And there's a little scene towards the end of this film, and there's nothing that you can really spoil about this, by the way. It's just kind of like a whole bunch of random sequences and scenarios, but there's a sequence towards the end of the film where he befriends this little girl, and this little girl is the only, you know, sense of human connection that he has with anybody in this amusement park, because everybody the entire film is just treating him like shit. Except for this little girl who he befriends, and so, you know, he finally has somebody to talk to connect with. But then, of course, the little girl ends up leaving him, and then he starts breaking down crying because he longs for any sense of human connection whatsoever. And he doesn't get that. Instead, he gets people yelling at him and treating him like, you know, like an elderly person because he's old. It's such a nightmare of a movie. Like, I really don't know how else to describe this. It's a fucking fever dream. The filmmaking in this is very experimental, and I don't know if they like added in some things since the film was found to make it appear more surreal and experimental, but it gives off such a weird, crazy vibe just in terms of the filmmaking and the way that all the aspects of the film kind of come together and complement each other. And it's such an odd movie that is very oddly structured, because here you're following this elderly man pretty much almost throughout the entire runtime of the movie, and all this fucked up shit's happening to him. Like, he's trying to enjoy himself on these rides. There's a scene where he's doing like bumper cars, and then all of a sudden there's like this elderly couple and another bumper car next to him, and then they crash into another bumper car, and then the police comes out of nowhere and they're like, oh, you know, you crashed into this car, you know, I need to see your license. And then all of a sudden it becomes this whole tirade of how elderly people can't drive because they're old, and this elderly couple is trying to defend themselves and say like, no, look, you know, I was just, you know, it's not because I'm old. And then the policeman's like writing a ticket because they crashed into a bumper car, and the main character is just kind of like standing off to the side watching this whole thing, and he's like, look, and he tells the police officer like, look, I saw the whole thing, like. And then the elderly couple is trying to defend themselves like, no, look, it's not because of this, it's because of that. But the police officer isn't listening to them because they are old, and elderly people don't know what they are talking about because they are old. And it does this a lot throughout the movie, where it just goes in these really outlandish scenarios and, you know, in ways to convey this message of elderly abuse, and it does like a lot of crazy and interesting things that kind of take you out of reality a little bit and kind of enters like this nightmarish world. As I was mentioning before, it doesn't feel real. It just feels like a bunch of random sequences that happen that don't really make sense or connect, but they all have a same reoccurring theme of elderly abuse. And it follows not only the main character being abused because he's elderly, but a bunch of other elderly people in this amusement park are also being abused by like staff members and customers and stuff of this amusement park. And just the way that it is shot and filmed is almost exactly like what you would actually see through the perspective and point of view of an elderly person who were to experience something like this. And the fact that they did that, and again, I don't know if this is intentional, I don't know if this is something that they did after the fact that they found the film, or if this is generally exactly what 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝑃 Romero had in mind, which if this is exactly like what he had in mind when he was filming this, then kudos to him, because this is out there. This is crazy. Like, this is, especially for the time that it was filmed in 1973, this is nuts. Like, there's nothing out there quite like this little film that he put together. So kudos to him if this is, you know, something that he genuinely thought of, you know, at the time that he filmed this. But for what the message is and for what it's doing, it does it perfectly. It does it perfectly. For being an educational PSA video on elderly abuse, it could not be more perfect, in my opinion. So yeah, that's the amusement park. If I had any complaints about this, I guess one minor thing would be, again, it doesn't really feel like a complete movie. It just more so feels like you're watching an art project, or, you know, because it is a PSA educational film, so it's not like necessarily a full-on narrative film, but for what it's doing, for what it's setting out to do, it does it perfectly well. And for that, you know, I think it's fine. I think it's fine for what it is. It's not meant to be a narrative film, you know, where there's supposed to be characters and a story. They're supposed to be fleshed out with a bunch of emotional depth to them, you know. None of that stuff is supposed to necessarily be there, so that's fine. So I guess it's not even really a complaint, you know. It's just something that you should expect going into when watching this. Don't expect like a narrative movie following a guy, you know, and you get to know the guy and who he is, because we don't know who this guy is. We just know the fact that he's old and there's people abusing him, and, you know, he's just trying to go to this amusement park to recapture his youthfulness, but he's having a really hard time doing that. And yeah, I feel like I'm just rambling on way too much about this, so I'm gonna shut the fuck up now and sum up my final thoughts. So the amusement park, a film that was once considered to be lost, is now found, and you can watch it on Shudder. It's pretty good. It's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. If this sounds like something that is down your alley, if you're a fan of like cult films or lost films, definitely check this one out. It is definitely worth your time. I'd probably give the film an 8 out of 10 if I even had to rate it, although this is kind of something that is pretty hard to rate, because it's not even really a movie. It's just more so like an experimental art project that 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝑃 Romero did back in the 70s. So if that sounds interesting to you, then fuck yeah, I feel like you will not be disappointed. This kind of delivers everything that you're expecting pretty much. And I'm sure you'll hear about the rumors of, you know, this being shelved because people found it to be too gruesome or too horrifying for the public eye. And one thing to keep in mind is that this was filmed in the 70s, so what was considered disturbing and gruesome to them is not, you know, by no means near the standard of what is considered to be gruesome and disturbing now. And because of that, there's not anything that is like necessarily super gruesome about the movie necessarily. I mean, there's no violence. So one thing about it that it does very well is that it's very unnerving. It's very psychological. It goes in a whole bunch of crazy different directions where you're like, what the fuck is even going on right now? So it does that very well. It does a good job at, like, you know, making you think like you're losing your mind. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this. It's an interesting little thing. I just wanted to make a quick video on this because I watched it last night and I was like, wow, this is really neat. And I feel like this would be a perfect thing to cover on my channel, you know? So yeah, there you go. That's the amusement park. 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝑃 Romero. May he rest in peace. May he hopefully not rise from the dead. Get it? Because he made zombie movies, and zombies are known for like rising from the dead. Let's hope 𝘥𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝘶𝑃 Romero doesn't rise from the dead, because, you know, he's the master of zombies, so, you know, let's hope he doesn't turn into a zombie, because then, oh no, what would happen if he turned into a zombie? What would happen? What would happen? What, you know? So the thing with they're